Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Beatball with Endpoints News. I'm your moderator for today's webinar, Navigating the Clinical AI Landscape and Charting Your Path to Precision Medicine. We're sponsored by Mendel, and I'm excited to welcome our panelists. Joining us, we have Karim Galil, MD, co-founder and CEO of Mendel AI. Mendel's mission is to make medicine objective by enabling the world's largest index of patient journeys, leveraging AI that understands medicine like a physician. Dr. Galil's experience as a physician demonstrated that medicine does not advance at the same rate as technology. With Mendel, he aims to bridge this gap, facilitate clinical research at scale, and make medicine truly objective. Karim is an entrepreneur by spirit. His first company, KryptonWorks, led health tech in the MENA region with customers including Fortune 500 companies. We're also joined by Charles Fisher, CEO and founder of Unlearn AI. Charles is a scientist with interests at the intersection of physics, machine learning, and computational biology. Previously, he worked as a machine learning engineer at Leap Motion and a computational biologist at Pfizer. He was a Philippe Meyer Fellow in Theoretical Physics at École Normale Supérieure in Paris, France, and a postdoctoral scientist in biophysics at Boston University. Charles holds a PhD in biophysics from Harvard University and a BS in biophysics from the University of Michigan. If you have any questions during today's webinar, our panelists have reserved some time at the end, so please hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen when you think of your question. This webinar will be available on demand tomorrow to rewatch or share with colleagues. And now I'll pass it off to Karim to get us started. Karim?
Thanks, Carrie. And Charles and I met through an investor like a few weeks ago, and we started talking about the state of AI in healthcare, and we found that we have a lot of common pain points, and we thought like the conversation should get extended. So we decided to do an endpoints webinar. So today is more of a casual conversation about how we view the state of AI in general, state of AI in healthcare, what are the challenges. And we both have two startups who are in the space of AI, but not necessarily competing to the same product. So it's going to be interesting to see two points of view from two angles around the clinical AI space. But before we get started, we thought we'd give quick intro about Mendel, quick intro about Unlearn. Mendel started in 2017, but actually we launched our first actual product in around mid-2023. And essentially the rest of the journey has been around R&D, and we see that as the journey of almost AI company today. It's different than building a software company. You have to kind of have long-term greed, pre-invest in a lot of R&D before you can actually have a product. We were very fortunate to have investors who believed in the mission from the very get-go. The company is the most funded clinical NLP company today. But around end of 2023, we were very excited to launch Hypercube, and this year we are growing our customer base. We're going to share a couple of use cases maybe today. What we do at Mendel is, if we can go to the next slide, as we view the state of clinical analysis today, like everyone is using standard stack. Think of like the snowflakes, the big queries of the world, keyword search. We do standard ETL work. And that process is pretty difficult. It costs a lot of money, but it is very prone to inaccuracies. We've seen a lot of cases where someone will come and say, we have 10,000 colon cancer patients running our platform. We only find 2,000. But if you go to the next slide, what we have done here is we've built a clinical NLP platform that allows you to command the full spectrum of your data. So it's not only your structured data. That being said, we're also able to ingest structured data like claims and FHIR and HL7. We consolidate all of that in a computer-ready knowledge representation, something that the computer can reason over. And then we provide a platform that allows you with no code to query this data and do very sophisticated clinical reasoning type of questions, like find me patients who have X, Y, and Z, but has never went through a treatment, for example. We're very excited about the early results. There is a paper that we just submitted for the CHIL conference, and we see that the product, if we also go to the next slide, next slide, please, has been taken to test against ChatGPT, Llama for a use case like clinical trial matching. So a group of researchers at UPenn has been interrogating 3 systems for a certain number of clinical trials. And we're able to see that our approach has been showing better accuracy, but also has been significantly better and designed to actually scale in the clinical domain from a cost and from a processing time. So that's essentially what Mendel does. We are clinical analytics 2.0 through an AI platform that has been built for the clinical domain. With that being said, I'll let you, Charles, introduce Unlearn.
Yeah, thanks, Kareem. So Unlearn is basically an AI research company who we're focused on. Maybe if I had to say it really broadly, I'd say solving AI for medicine. That would be the mission of the company. Also founded in 2017, now raised about $135 million. Totally about 75 people. And, you know, as I said, I think that our focus has always been that we're an AI research company who's focused on really inventing new kinds of AI technologies that allow us to solve previously unsolved problems, particularly in medicine. That's our real goal as a company. So we end up on a lot of these kind of like AI lists. But our main focus today is, in terms of our go-to-market strategy, is that we work with biotech and pharmaceutical companies to help them run more efficient and more accurate clinical trials. So if you go to the next slide, and yeah, just click to the animations. The animations, but you might as well just click them. So it's effectively what we aim to be able to do, to create, is a digital twin of an individual person. And what that means is, let's imagine that Charles participates in the clinical trial. I'll take data from myself collected before the clinical trial, input that into some AI pre-trained model, and I want to be able to forecast what would happen to me in the future. And we'd like to be able to do this for effectively any measurement that you want, to forecast it at any point in the future for anything you want under any scenario for any person. So it's a very challenging problem, but that's the type of thing that we work on. And then we partner with biotech and pharmaceutical companies, mostly in phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, starting in neurology, to include patients' digital twins to make those trials better. And next slide, I think, goes back to you, Kareem, but I could be wrong.
Nope, it does. So we thought, just to set the stage today, kind of we put together the slide to just kind of see, like, set the stage around how we see the state of AI in general, and specifically around the clinical domain. And we essentially see there's 3 big buckets of AI-related companies. You have folks who are actually building foundational models or foundational approaches towards an AI problem, and we like to call those the innovators. And those are essentially folks who would hire mathematicians, PhD in computer science, more like R&D, sophisticated approach to, again, an AI problem that hasn't been solved before and needs a different, unique approach. But then there's also a lot of companies today that are coming in the tooling space, and those make the job of the innovators easier. They provide you with compute power. They would provide you with marketplaces for models. They would provide you with levels of abstraction that allows you to build AI faster or to deploy AI faster. Then we also see that there is almost now, we were making the joke, almost every couple of hours, there is a new AI company, and a bunch of those come and sit into the wrapping space. And those would essentially leverage technologies that are built by the innovators, using tools built by the tool builders, to put an interface on top of a foundational technology and essentially build a use case or a product. So there wouldn't be essentially a breakthrough in AI. It is more of like a productization or a layer of UX on top of a model built with the innovators. On the innovators side, the challenge that we're seeing is most of the work and the attraction has been happening around general domain AI, and it became a term. And the idea is you want to build an AI that can do everything under the sun. And there are companies that have been on the forefront of that, such as OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, Google DeepMind. But what the premises of today's webinar is about is more that there is a breed of companies now that are doing the same type of innovation. They're actually solving very hard AI problems, but specifically for the clinical domain or specifically for a clinical use case. And we believe that this is going to be beyond the hype of AI. This is going to be actually the state where you're going to find a lot of domain-specific AI technologies that are built, say, for healthcare, for fintech, for defense kind of applications. And we see Mendel and Unlearn to be one of those companies that are in the clinical domain, yet kind of innovating and building breakthrough type of technologies. And one question we thought we could start off today with is like, what is AI to begin with? I think there is a lot of there isn't really like a strong definition. There is a lot of debate actually. How would you define AI? But again, to set the stage, here's how we think of the market. To also set the stage, maybe we can start with you, Charles. Kind of, how would you define an AI? What's the difference between AI and just a piece of software?
Sure. So I actually take a very narrow view of what AI is. In my view today. So historically, if you look back, AI was sort of a field of research about creating computers that are able to learn and act on their own without any human oversight effectively. Then that was what AI was. And there's lots of ways that people can do that. But what really has become the dominant paradigm in the last decade has been things that I would call connectionist. And so connectionist models are a sort of class of models that are really inspired by the way the brain works. Some of us might say loosely inspired by the way the brain works, but that's effectively the concept. So to me today, I primarily define AI as the use of algorithms that are inspired by the way the brain works to solve problems without a tremendous amount of human oversight. Of course, there's still some human is the teacher, effectively, but that's the way that I define it. So it's actually relatively narrow. So I exclude like classical machine learning algorithms like random forests or SVMs. I actually exclude those from the definition of what would be AI in my mind.
And I agree with that definition. I think the simplest definition, again, I unlike Charles, I don't come from a technical background. I come more from a clinical background. But the definition that made most sense to me coming into that space, it's a clinical model of the brain. It's a a computer model of the brain. It's essentially you're trying to get the computer to model a function of the brain or multiple functions of the brain. But to that extent, it has been interesting because the way our brain works, and there's this really interesting book, Think Fast and Slow. You have two systems, right? You have a very intuitive system that doesn't think much, that doesn't take time to make decisions, but it would essentially, like when you swerve your car, when you're driving, when you're breathing, you're essentially using that system. But you also have another system that is slower, more arithmetic. That's the system that you will use to solve an algorithm or to think of a big idea. And machine learning in many different ways mimics that intuitive, fast pattern recognition system. But there isn't a lot of technologies or companies that has also been working on system one, the more arithmetic, slower ones. And essentially, the way I view machine learning, large language models, neural networks, it's like a parrot in many different ways that is looking at a pattern and repeating it. And when it comes into text, it makes you confuse fluency with intelligence. But very, very few technologies have also system one. What's your take on that? And how does that affect the use case that you are working on?
Yeah, so I don't know where to start. Start on the use case. So I'll start on the use case and then I'll back into to the broader question. What we focus on as our use case is really different, I think, from what everybody else focuses on. Kind of in actually most of the AI research community. We use some stuff that involves like language processing, but actually we use that more internally for our own like internal data cleaning efforts. That's not like our products are not built off of those kinds of things externally. We actually use a totally different style of neural network architecture that no one else in the world uses. And so the original idea for what we were thinking about was not so much how do you create AI to solve problems that humans are good at, but how do you create AI to solve problems that humans don't know how to solve? And so I'm thinking about, like, to me, the one like prototypical example, it's not from us, where somebody did this, is AlphaFold, right? If you give me the sequence of a protein, if you write it down in front of me and you say, Charles, what's the three-dimensional structure of that protein? My brain cannot compute that for you. I don't know how to do that. And so, but those are the kind of problems that I'm really interested in. It's like, how do we create new kinds of AI systems to solve the problems humans don't know how to? So basically solve scientific problems. But I'd say that a lot of the work that's gone on over the last decade has been kind of more around how do we create AI that's able to automate problems humans are good at. And so those would be things like language tasks, or same thing with images, right? You think about recognizing objects in images, or now even generating images. Those are things that humans are really good at, and we're trying to create systems that automate them. So anyway, so to me, like, our use case is super duper different. But Kareem, I forgot the beginning of your question. So what's
It's
the
like
beginning of the question?
that most of the like people basically use machine learning and AI as if it's one word. It's like synonyms each other, when essentially machine learning is more of like, if we use the early discussion about AI is a model of the brain. The brain has two systems. There is the
Oh yeah, the
machine
fast and
learning type
slow.
of a
Yeah,
system, and there is more the arithmetic, more
that's right.
slower
Yeah.
system.
Well, yeah. So I mean, for the work that we are doing today, I agree with you. I think that all AI right now, all AI methods are sort of relatively simple input-output systems, um, and all of them. So my view is, you said it kind of at the beginning. I wouldn't go so far as to say that things are just parrots. I think that they're interpolators. They're very good at it. But I don't think that the kinds of things that we've worked at today are by themselves going to get us to true sort of general or super intelligence. I think that there are breakthroughs that are required to get to that, and I know people are working on it. Reasoning systems and other kinds of systems like that. But I think that today they're primarily going to give you. When I say they're interpolating, what I mean by that is that they give you similar answers to similar things they've seen before. If you ask it to create some brand new thing that, like, it's never seen anything like that before, and you're extrapolating to some really truly brand new situation, today's AI systems don't know how to do that.
Yeah. In our use case here at Mendel, our number one job is to synthesize a patient journey from complex data. So we would take 1,000 PDFs coming from an oncologist, some claims data coming from a provider, from an insurance company, and our job is to synthesize coherent patient journey from many conflicting facts. So you would find in one page the doctor saying the patient is metastatic. But then you look at the pathologist saying the patient is stage 1, and now you have two conflicting pieces of information that you need to reconcile, which requires a lot of clinical reasoning. And our experience with machine learning only approach, or a large language model only approach, that those systems, as you said, are really good at pattern recognition and repeating something that humans are good at if they are fed with the right data. But it cannot do complex clinical reasoning like a physician or a clinical expert would be able to. And the only way around it is to couple it with some sort of a knowledge representation, or something to ground the rules of medicine or the concepts of medicine, or ground the machine learning model into it. And it's so interesting because Jan LeCun, which is one of obviously the few people that won the Turing Award for neural network, newer architectures, was saying the neural network today is not even at the level of a brain of a cat. And the only way we can come closer is if we can couple it with symbolic AI and with knowledge representations, and we don't know how. So that's where we have been spending a lot of time. How can you do complex reasoning with an AI model, essentially?
And yeah, Kareem, I was just going to ask, maybe, and maybe this is too technical of a question, but could you explain a little bit as to how you would view kind of that as being different from fine tuning just an existing model on, like, say, medical texts or something like that? Like, how is that going to be different?
So when you're looking at like, a lot of the models today have limitations around the context window, and a clinical record by default will exceed that context window easily, which increases the chances of hallucinating. The other thing, essentially, how those models would work is it would bring terms that are related to each other closer to each other. So an adverse event and fatigue would probably be closer to each other in the model. But once you move to another area, you move from oncology to immunology, fatigue becomes more of a symptom rather than an adverse event. And how can you teach the model to start understanding the nuanced differences between those two things? I would say the other thing is, no matter what you do when you're using, especially a larger language model, the idea of hallucination becomes incredibly dangerous when you are making some sort of a clinical synthesis of a patient journey. And having like almost a filtering layer that would tell you you cannot have headache in your knees. Like headache is probably not going to happen in your knees ever. And there is impossible that you can have a stage 1 patient who's also metastatic at the same time. And it's like kind of giving you those, like, those things are impossible to happen. It's just like, it's against the laws of medicine. Helps a lot in decreasing the hallucination. I would say the third thing is explainability. Specifically in our use case, folks want to know why did the AI conclude that this patient has adenocarcinoma and not any other type of histology? And you have to be able to trace back the logic, and it becomes incredibly hard when you're having a machine learning only approach to the problem. I would say those are the three things: explainability, hallucination, and the context window of medicine in general is generally high.
That's an interesting idea because I would bet that I would bet that those unallowable things, if you actually just trained a model on the raw data, like you just trained a model on raw data, that you would actually learn those things because the data do have mistakes. I absolutely worked on a project, I remember, where a patient had like a leg amputation at some point, but their medical records later on have them having problems with that leg, which was amputated. And so if you're just training entirely on the medical records, you're actually learning some of the mistakes that are in the raw data themselves.
Yep. But then you still have to deal with some of the other problems like the hallucinations and the explainability. But it's also very interesting because the way folks practice medicine in general has a lot of intuition into it. So if you start training on, like, the only way you can get to that is you have to train almost on every medical record in the US coming in from different states with different regulations, with different ways of approaching things to like take out the bias. But the other approach would be is like, hey, no matter how you practice medicine, these are the periodic table of medicine. Those are the laws that would govern how we would approach a problem. I think one topic we talked about is, as like both of us are obviously commercializing an AI product into the healthcare space, and this is not an easy space to commercialize anything in general, let alone an AI product. So how's your experience with adoption? How are you seeing the buyers today on the health? Everyone wants to buy an AI product, but do you think everyone have the right criteria? Can you talk more about that?
No, I mean, obviously, like you said, it's a difficult space to work into. I think for us, we have found. I think I'm going to go with the two things that have been positive and have worked for us, and maybe two things that I would say that are barriers. So I'll start with the positives. One of the biggest things for us is that I think when you're deploying sort of AI-based systems into any sort of medical context, there's usually some kind of extra layer of validation that people are looking for. And so in our case, we work in phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. Like we are working as part of a study protocol, actually, like our AI is like written into the protocol of these studies. And so we wanted to be able to go through and get regulatory buy-in. And so going and getting, we got a regulatory qualification for one of our methods from the EMA in 2022, got a letter from the FDA at the end of last year saying that they concur with that. And so working with the regulators has actually been really easy, I would say. I mean, I wouldn't say it's fast, like, on a startup time scale, working with the regulators hasn't been fast, but it has been a really positive experience in that I think the regulatory agencies they're thinking about this correctly. and that they're not actually that focused on like, what is the underlying algorithm and how does it work, and that they're much more focused on the context of use, making sure that whatever AI system you're creating, when you deploy it into some use case, that it really works for that. And so I think that that's really good. And then getting those qualifications has really helped a lot with our sort of go to market. The other piece, though, that I'd say has been a positive is just finding innovative people. There are people in the industry like who are they want to do things differently. They want to see technology get adopted, or they're frustrated with the current e-rooms law situation where drug development is just getting slower and more expensive, and they want to do something different. I think finding those people has been great. Now the barriers are one of the big barriers is I've coined this actually back. My friend Austin Huang coined this back when we were working at Pfizer together, but he called it the discernment problem. And the discernment problem is that there's a bajillion companies that say they are all using AI. And the people who we're trying to sell to are not experts in AI. And they have, to them, all of these companies look exactly the same. So how do you actually stand out amongst all of these companies, many of whom are not maybe doing anything particularly innovative, but everyone's using the same language. And that would get to my second point, which is even inside the pharma companies. Today I feel like my definition of AI, which I described as very narrow, which is like connectionist based models that like neural networks, has been replaced by what I would say the industry uses, which is anything that uses a computer. This is AI. So like you ask, like, what's biostatistics? AI. What's bioinformatics? AI. Like all of those things have just gotten rebranded as AI. I hear lots of people, for example, say they're like, oh, well, we're doing AI. We've been doing AI for 50 years. But that doesn't make any sense because the algorithms that people are using for like modern AI systems have been all like really developed in the last 10 or 15 years. So it doesn't make sense if you say you've been doing it for 50 years. Then you're not doing AI, in my opinion, if you've been doing it 50 years. You're using other kinds of computational methods. So that's been my kind of broad experience. What about you, Kareem?
In my use case, we don't have, I mean, there's pain in getting regulatory approval, and my heart goes to all the effort that you had to go through that. But I think down the path, to your point, it kind of gives you that stamp of validation that can help a lot in your go-to-market. In my use case, we don't have that. So I have to only suffer from the latter point that you made, which is like everything is an AI company till proven opposite. And to your point also, we are seeing the innovators in every org, and those are folks who are actually spending the time. I always get a little bit, I mean, I'll put it lightly, irritated once I find someone with pure MBA investment banking background who took 2 AI Coursera courses coming in into a call diligencing an AI company on behalf of a vendor. And that essentially becomes a big problem for us because we're not looking at the same ground basis. And the example I always give my team, when I wanted to buy a ring to my wife to propose, I had no freaking clue how to buy a diamond. For me, it's a piece of glass till proven opposite, right? Everything just looks shiny. And it's only when I started getting educated, like here is the clarity score, here is this, here is that, it actually started making sense to me. Why would I pay 10K? I'm not going to say how much I paid for my wife's ring, but how much should I pay versus like $100, right? And I feel a lot of the AI buyers today haven't went through that exercise yet of kind of understanding what are the criterias that you should be looking at an AI vendor. What we are betting on is that a lot of the pilots that are happening today are going to fail. And then companies that actually did have true technologies will remain. And that's the state of every bubble that happens. You just raised money, and we're seeing in VCs saying the same thing. They are not betting big on a lot of AI companies because they assume that most of those pilots will fail. And those who are actually going to pass 2024 and show clear ROI on the business or clear ROI on the outcomes for the patients are going to be the AI companies that will eventually survive that wave. Do you see the same? Do you see a lot of pilots happening in around your use cases, or is it like we're either going to get in or not going to even try the product?
I mean, we've been, in our case, there are definitely still companies that want to run like earlier stage, like test cases, pilots, and things. I would say that in some cases we're a little bit we're some part beyond that, and that we are actually using our methods in some phase 2 and we're working on some protocols for some bigger phase 3 studies now. So to a degree we're a little bit, but I would say like there's the innovators where we're just beyond that pilot stage. like we're deploying things now with some companies where there are some forward-thinking people, and then there are other companies who we hear all the time. And you want to know what makes me irritated is this phrase, which is I've heard now multiple times that we want to be your second customer in this disease area or this indication, whatever. It's like, oh, you want to be the second? It's like that is just like what's wrong. In my opinion, that's like what's wrong with medicine. is that attitude. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there are lots and lots of companies who are, who in the broader space, I think that there are a lot of companies who are working or applying computational techniques or applying various machine learning technologies to problems in medicine or healthcare. I don't think that there's a lot of companies that are really trying to push the boundaries for how these things really work. I think, to me, one of the biggest challenges for the thinking about the way AI is moving right now for people in this industry is they're used to a really slow moving technology. So you think about drug development and discovery, right? Drug discovery development takes like 10 or 15 years to develop and bring a new drug to market. And so maybe it's a little faster for a medical device. I don't know. 5 years probably still seems fast though. So you're talking about 5 to 15 years is the pace over which things change. But in AI, things are changing right now every 5 to 15 days, right? And so part of what I think is a challenge, for example, is like you might work with somebody. If you're really an AI research company, then if you've done a pilot with me 3 months ago, you haven't piloted my technology now. You piloted my 3 months ago technology.
My prior version. We have the same problem where actually the customer buys the product or gets into a pilot, and 2 weeks later we just launched a newer model, and the customer is like 2 weeks behind. But it's not only 2 weeks. It's some R&D work that has been happening for a few. But we talked before the webinar about areas of when we were setting this up, we said, look, like areas of differences between both of us would make this webinar more exciting. So here's one area of difference that we can go through. When, for example, we were talking about the idea of like headache in the knee or something like that, what I've heard from you is what I hear a lot from clients is like, I bet if you actually train a model on more clinical data, that essentially that problem wouldn't be solved. But when Mendel started 2016, essentially we have a team of 100 plus clinical annotators, and we have tried every model under the sun, from BERT back in 2019 or something to like the latest and the best today. And it essentially does not work. The systems, the amount of data that we have per patient is too big, where the model really gets confused and starts iterating nonsense essentially around a patient journey. But here we are, like I view you as a as an AI expert, but we have to go through that debate back and forth. The problem is if you and I are going through that, or someone on my team is going through that, there's some ground truth that we can stick to. It becomes 100x harder. If I'm talking to someone who has never built an AI model, who has never trained an AI model, it becomes a losing battle. So what ends up happening is they do follow their own path. They come back 6 months later or a year later and say, you know what, we just lost whatever, $5 million on that initiative and it didn't work. One actually true case that happened with us is we've been working with a big diagnostic company, and they have taken multiple approaches, including Google-like approaches. And there have been voices in the company saying, hey, like Google is always going to win over a small company like Mendel. The approach of machine learning as an only approach is good enough. They went through that. They found, say, X number of patients that they thought is eligible for a certain project they had. And using our approach, it was like 20% of that number. And essentially what happened was like, well, if that's the case, Mendel is wrong, the other company is right. And we had to push for manual error analysis of the two sets of data. And guess what ended up happening is actually we were right. But this type of friction and like the proof is on you type of headwinds is what I'm seeing today in the market as the biggest challenge for AI companies, including yours or mine.
Yeah, the other thing though, with sort of, I would say the flip side of some of these things that's really good, I in my opinion, about working within kind of this space is that the best marketing that any of us AI companies can have, and it's absolutely been true for us, it's just publishing an actual research paper. That's it. Just you publish a research paper and people at pharma read it, right? That's absolutely true. For us, like I've had people at the FDA ask us questions about our papers on archive, not even peer-reviewed papers. The FDA is reading our archive papers. So I think that that's one of the best parts about working within a scientific field is that if you engage, if you actually really engage and be like, here are the algorithms that we're using, here's these things, here's how they work, and here's examples of them working in these areas, that you get real scientific engagement from the other side.
I like 1000% agree with that. And I think actually talking about like how can an AI buyer assess a vendor, I would say if you don't have any peer-reviewed publications, the chances are you don't have any scientists on your team, because it's not only for marketing. Your team will ask, I want to publish about this. I want to compare against the status quo. I think this is a really great point, and it's like easy to go through that checklist. If you don't find peer-reviewed publications like talking about the technology or comparing the system to like status quo, that is for me is already a yellow flag that something is not going well. This year we've decided actually to allocate around 70% of our marketing budget towards publishing peer-reviewed publications rather than actually spending on conferences and things like that. But I 100% agree with that point. So what's the most like provoking AI marketing message that kind of made you feel like, oh man, come on, that's too much? Like something to like making a big deal of an AI capability that does not exist, or something that just foundationally incorrect and you felt like that is outrageous.
That's not actually a hard question. I don't know if I have seen something that's been like an outrageously overhyped claim. I don't know if I actually don't really think that that is really what I have seen. In fact, I remember at JP Morgan, one of the previous JP Morgans, maybe like JP Morgan early 2023 or something like that. I was on a panel with endpoints and I said something about like by the end of the year, an AI system is going to pass like the bar exam, the medical, the MCAT, the LSAT. It's going to pass all these things, just one system. That's true, right? But at the time, people acted like it was hype. So I actually think that, at least from my opinion, AI within the healthcare space is underhyped. I think it is underhyped because I think that people focus so much on what has been done. They go, what have you done? And of course, that's very, very important. You gotta be able to get things into these clinical trials. You got to use them or whatever use cases. But again, I think that what people are missing is that this is a rapidly advancing technology. So to me, it's less around like people's claims around what AI can do or will be able to do. I think that that's largely underhyped. To me, the stuff is that like when somebody's like, hey, we use sophisticated AI, and then you go, what is it? And it's like sklearn import PCA, and it's like, well, that's not that's not really what I had in mind. And so, but that's actually often, but that's kind of what I think is challenge is that's really difficult to tell sometimes. What people really are doing. So you have to really, I'd say, I've seen papers like this. I'm not going to call out who specifically, but I have like a specific paper in mind, for example, where the whole beginning of the paper talks about some deep neural network based model or whatever, I forget what it is. And then halfway through the paper, it just switches to using a random forest. The title of the paper is like deep learning for something like this. But the deep learning model loses to just the random forest in their paper. And so the whole second half of the paper, just like, and so we use this random forest for the rest of our analyses. And that's like a fairly well-known AI startup in the medical healthcare space that published that paper. But again, at least they published the paper, so you can read the thing and see what they really did.
So talking about you're saying like well-known startup, coming into the, I'm seeing a lot of the hype happening now on the M&A side of things. So obviously every company is trying to take an AI approach that is going to boil down to like buy or build. And the buy is not only like buy from a vendor, it's actually buy the vendor altogether and use the AI capability. We're seeing a lot of that happening. But there is a fairly like also known startup in our field that has been essentially using APIs from another AI vendor, which basically means like you can just go buy those APIs yourself. They just have a cooler interface than what you would get from the original vendor. And we just got to see that this company acquired at like high dollar value. And in my mind, man, like for $5 million, you could have done exactly the same thing and you could have just saved another like $100 million or something. So I'm seeing also some of that hype happening on the M&A side where companies that kind of got the right banker or got the right type of packaging with some papers that have very interesting titles are ending up doing some interesting transactions that wouldn't have happened, I guess, had there more rigor around the AI criteria. So what are the criteria? Like if you are buying an AI company or if you are buying an AI product in general, what would you advise people to think of?
Well, I honestly, actually, I might go in a little bit of a different direction on that, Kareem. Even if somebody wants to use like an off-the-shelf wrapper, they probably still should buy an AI company to do it. So at least from my own perspective, I mean, I can speak from like, I'm a PhD in theoretical physics, right? And I'm really an AI researcher, and I attempted to go and work at a big pharma company, and I would describe my experience there kind of as, I like my colleagues and everything, but I kind of describe it as an organ rejection. Like it was like there was a very clear oil and water kind of situation, and I think that that's quite broadly that the culture of companies who are really building these new AI systems is very different from the culture of a traditional company in healthcare, medicine, pharma, life sciences. I don't think that they go together, and so I think that building these types of capabilities internally, having tried to do it myself, okay, is probably impossible. I think it's probably impossible. And that doesn't mean people are going to try. They're going to try, but I think it's impossible. And so I actually think that if people do want to have these internal capabilities, they should go to look for companies that for acquisitions. They should leave those companies semi-independent. I mean, so one of the examples of like what, and I guess I don't know too much. I have a few friends who are at it now, but would be like Prescient Design. So Genentech in the drug discovery space went out and acquired this AI. It was a small AI company at the time. It's actually grown, I think, a lot since it's been part of Genentech. But I think that type of model in which if you're looking to really do these things yourself, that you do go out and acquire a company for the culture and leave it independent so that you don't mess its culture up. I actually think of as being important, actually, yeah.
Would you do the same if, so let's talk about, maybe this is the last point and we can jump to questions. Let's talk about talent. In my mind, like the biggest deterministic factor around an AI company is the talent. I think First Mar or some VC said they assume there's like lesser than 2,000 people in the world today who are capable of actually doing a breakthrough in AI or have the right background for it. But anyways, it's a long way to say like talent. And we're seeing the talent war between like big tech and even startups. Every capable AI scientist today is getting multiple offers from multiple places, right? So how much weight would you put on talent? Because to your point, even if the company is just wrapping a technology, just acquire it for the culture. And I would agree with that. but I would say the rest of the statement would be if they have AI talent. Because if you're buying culture, you want to buy the AI culture. But if you have a company that mainly 100% are software engineers that has been wrangling APIs, those are no different than the software engineers that you already have in your company. And I mean, we've seen a company like Mosaic AI, for example, acquired by Databricks for an enormous amount of money. But again, it boils down to the talent. And even if the company didn't have that much traction. So how much weight would you put on talent? Or is your point that as long as they have attempted some sort of innovation, they probably have the right traits, so still take the risk on that? But like, how much weight would you put on talent, essentially, is my question.
No, I mean 100%. Although I wouldn't necessarily put down the software engineering talent. I think software engineers are very important in particularly in ML. But like you mentioned something earlier about, if your ML team is just a bunch of MBAs, then that's not really an ML team. I agree with that. I think that companies who, but that's kind of partly that is my point though. Effectively, when I talk about the cultural difference, which is that at Unlearn, most of our employees have PhDs in physics or math or computer science. And it's very, very different. You go to a life sciences company, and everyone also has PhDs, but they're PhDs in biology or they're MDs, and these are very different disciplines. And not only are there different disciplines because of the different backgrounds and stuff, but there are cultural differences between what people care about who go into those fields typically. And I think the challenge for a lot of the companies who are trying to be sort of this new tech bio set of companies is actually how do you integrate these cultures? Like if you're a small biotech and you're, like say you're Recursion and you're trying to like really simultaneously be a leader in AI and ML and in drug discovery, I think it's hard probably to be able to actually really truly have these two separate cultures and get them together. So no, I agree with you that 1000% you want to be looking for companies that are hiring math, physics, computer scientists. But I would say that engineering talent is as important as research talent.
100%.
An enormous amount of the progress in ML, particularly in the last like 5 years, has really been engineering driven more than research driven.
There is, Jan LeCun also said this, let's engineer the heck out of it, which is essentially, if you look at OpenAI, it's like a lot of engineering that happened on a technology like transformers that has already been there before that. But it's like, if you take a clinical analogy, it's like you cannot have a hospital with nurses only or physicians only. And I think it's the same thing. You cannot build an AI company with engineers only or with PhDs in math and physics only. I think it's a lot of collaboration between both. And it's a spectrum of how much the density has to be between those. I know Endpoints want us to jump into questions, and we have a lot of questions here. I think the most interesting question was for you to say which medical startup company had that funny approach to the paper.
Not going to say that. Yeah. It's a published paper, so people can go look it up themselves. Yeah.
I think one question for you that I thought was interesting, and maybe I can take one for me, is like, for you was like, can AI cut down the time it takes to carry out the clinical trials, in particular phase 3?
Oh yeah, I mean 1000%. This is exactly what our goal is to work on. So the basic idea about what we do, if you think about, applying this kind of idea of a digital twin in a clinical trial. So a clinical trial, you want to know what would happen to a patient if they got a drug in comparison to what would happen if they don't. And so what we're effectively doing is we're using these models to simulate one of those outcomes for a patient. And if that model was perfect, you could actually run a clinical trial that doesn't have a control group. So you could just say, I'm going to take each patient, I'm going to create their digital twin, I'm going to simulate what would happen if they were assigned to a control group. And just by doing that comparison, you would be able to get an estimate of the treatment effect. Like you were saying earlier about hallucinations and other things, today's AI systems are not perfect. So the types of things that we're working in, there's still randomized studies where you do have some patients being randomized to a real control group, but it's fewer than in a typical study. So we might work to say half the size of a control group as you would need in a typical study, and that cuts off potentially a couple of hundred patients for a large trial. makes your trial more attractive. This is why people are participating in trials in the first place, is typically to get access to a new experimental therapy. So it's really a win-win in that we're able to do things that speed up the trials for sponsors, but do it in a way that keeps sort of the science rigorous, so you get the same kind of rigorous results out of these RCTs as other ones, and aligns with what patients want out of clinical trials in the first place.
I think one other question for both of us actually was, what do you think, I know we're going to disagree on this one, so let's go through it. What do you think regarding the criticism of deep learning by some known people like Gary Marcus, that current AI are in worrisome hands regarding AGI, and how would that impact medical AI in general? And related more to both of your companies, how do you think another new AI theory could boost your companies? You want to take this first?
Sure. I'm trying to decide how mean to be. So look, I'm sorry, but like if you want to go out there and think about, like, today's AI systems have some limitations. They do. That's why people like me exist. That's what my job is to think about how to overcome, how to invent new kinds of algorithms that will overcome these limitations. And do I think that those new types of things will be within the realm of what we call deep learning? I do. I think that there will be different architectures and different training techniques and different loss functions and things like this than we use today. But I think that they will fit under the same umbrella. I think that again, if you look at what we do at Unlearn, we actually use a totally new architecture. We use a completely new kind of architecture that no one else in the world uses, actually, for our machine learning approaches. It's a deep neural network, but it's a really weird kind of deep neural network. It's super strange. So again, we're inventing new kinds of machine learning, like totally new kinds of things. I think that the criticism where people just say, like, hey, it won't work. I don't understand. I don't understand what Gary is doing, frankly. Like, go out there and try to build a neural network then that he has never, ever published anything in which he actually trains a neural network that works well, or trains some other machine learning technology that works well on something. Go do it. Stop just telling everybody they're going to be wrong, and go show us how to do it if you think you know so well. I don't understand. I don't understand. So anyway, it started nice and then it got meaner.
But I actually have probably a different point of view on that. I see, like, sometimes it's that, to your point, there's some extreme in how shooting. I feel like in trying to become objective, we're becoming extreme in shooting down some other technology. But to be clear also, it's like if you go to Home Depot and you buy a hammer and you say, trust me, I can solve every problem in the world with that hammer, nobody's going to believe you. And I think the AI community is doing the same. We're picking machine learning and neural networks, and we're saying every single problem under the sun is going to be solved with this. And I feel like this is also a failing approach. Folks like Yan LeCun, again, I'll keep coming back to that, is running an AI department at Facebook, and they are shipping models. They have shipped Llama, and they're also talking about the limitations of the AI technologies in certain areas, especially around reasoning. I've personally attended a presentation by a big AI company that I'm also not going to mention their name, one of the most famous AI companies that just were in the media because their CEO left and they brought the CEO back, but I'm not going to mention their name. And they went through like a 20 minutes presentation around applications of this technology in healthcare. And then someone comes in and asks, but what happens when hallucination goes on? Does it ever hallucinate? And the person says, yes, it does. And says, okay, how can I tell? He said, we actually don't have a way yet, but we warn our users to not take the results as is. But the reality of the matter is he spent a 20 minutes presentation not talking about it altogether. He only brought it up when he was asked. So it is not that they are telling their users that there is a lot of downsides and there is a lot of limitations for today's technology. I would say the second thing is, once you come into the area of machine learning and neural networks, essentially the training data dictates a lot. Like, technology aside, training data dictates a lot. And the fact that the company owns what data the model is going to be trained on and don't have to always disclose what is this data can create insane amount of biases that literally boils down to the CEO and the executive team deciding, should we do this more or not? So in my use case, I can train the data on a certain drug. Like I can basically show the model patients responding really well to lung cancer if they take a drug that some pharma company paid me more money for, and I can bias my training. Like I can bias the training data easy to do something like that, and I can always say, sorry, it's the model, or the model hallucinated. But there is a lot of ethical considerations on what data the models are using. There's a lot of ethical considerations on how we present it. That being said, I also think it's a beautiful piece of technology, and don't get me wrong, 70% of our stack boils down to machine learning models. It's a beautiful piece of work, but it on its own is like a hammer that's going to solve every problem under the sun. I know we have 2 more minutes left, but there was an interesting question for you, which is, what is it? And I'm excited about digital twins, so I'll give you the last 2 minutes. Could you help us understand in simple words, what are the biggest benefits of using digital twins in clinical trials?
Oh, sure. I mean, the biggest benefit is that you can run a clinical trial in which fewer people have to be randomized to control. So that allows you to run the trial faster, because you don't, if you have fewer patients to enroll, then your time to complete enrollment is faster. It's usually months faster. It aligns better with the expectations of patients. So you get more people, a larger fraction of people getting access to the experimental treatment, which is usually why they participate at all. And we can do this in a way in which we make sure that the clinical trial produces accurate and unbiased estimates of how effective the treatment is. That's how we've been able to go and work with the regulatory agencies to get these methods qualified for phase 2 and 3 studies. How all of that works, the simple terms in 2 minutes is maybe a little bit too hard. But we'd be happy if anyone wants to know more about those things. Just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of minutes left, so I don't know if at least I'll offer that, and I know that Charles will do the same. But I would say like some closing notes here is, like, if you look at Charles' background, it's celebrate or die. My background is Muhammad Ali hitting down someone. There is a lot of people really trying to scratch the surface here on what AI can do in healthcare, and we're essentially not doing this only to build companies and make money. I think there's, both of us, we talked about this, like both of us coming from a lot of like there's no motivation for you to like go build crazy technologies unless you truly believe in the outcome of that. So please reach out to us if you have any questions around AI in general. If you're trying to buy a AI technology and you want some advice on what considerations should you consider, I think both of us would be more than happy to like be helpful as much as we can. We hope those 60 minutes were the start of the conversation and not the end of the conversation. And we wanted to bring it to you as organic as it can be and as casual as it can be also. So thanks, Charles, for that, and for Endpoints also for helping us put this together.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Fortunately, that is all the time that we do have for today. I know it was a great discussion, lots of great questions coming in. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Charles, for sharing your time and expertise. And thank you to Mendel for sponsoring the discussion today at Endpoints webinars. If you'd like to rewatch today's webinar or share it with colleagues, a link for on-demand viewing will be emailed to you tomorrow. I'm Carrie Beeball for Endpoints News. Thanks for joining, and we hope to see you at the next. Take care.
Thank you.